Welcome back, everyone, to the Midlife Academy Podcast. I'm Bree Smith, and I'm here with Kate Schaefers of Midlife Academy at the University of Minnesota. Today, we're excited to talk about the topic of the midlife pivot, finding steady ground in times of change. There's so much turbulence in the world today, and we're also on the heels of a pandemic, another moment of turbulence and uncertainty. And now with this kind of uncertainty and turbulence, there's a tendency to kind of insulate ourselves, I think, to withdraw from the chaos. I've certainly felt myself in that position. And, at this moment, it might be also a key kind of moment to start thinking of possible changes for one's life. But in that moment of uncertainty, I think fear can also take over. And with that fear, there's a lot of consequences, and that we might not open ourselves up to possibilities at this moment in which kind of life is kind of forcing us to kind of stop and start thinking about those possibilities. We might limit our imaginations, and this can kind of further kind of exacerbate this feeling of being stuck in our current situations. We might cut ourselves off from networks as well when we're feeling kind of powerless. And those networks are really kind of a crucial part of navigating this potential change in our lives. So I'm really excited to talk to Kate about this topic, who has a lot of insights. And so Kate, like when I'm it's kind of weaving this kind of very kind of stressful picture of this moment, how can we deal with this moment in productive ways?
Yeah, I know that when we feel fear, it's our instinct to withdraw, to hunker down. And but as we're thinking about what's next, that may not be the answer that is going to help us move forward. And so, there's a couple of things that we could do as we think about managing that fear. One is just really acknowledging that we feel it, and accept that it's going to be uncomfortable. Whenever we do go through change, whether it is coming from ourselves or coming from the outside world, it is there's a lot of discomfort. It's a very uncomfortable time for us to be living through that. But the more we turn over our power to fear, the less we move forward and claim what we're looking for. And so instead of acknowledge the fear, but instead of giving into it, to think about how can we reframe it. We know that we are in uncharted territory. It can be very overwhelming, but also trusting that we have the resources to get through it. And, sometimes it's just taking small steps, starting where you are and taking baby steps. There's a wonderful quote, and I won't get it exact, from Martin Luther King, but he talked about, if you can't fly, then run or walk or crawl, but keep moving forward. And I think in times like this, don't get sidelined by the fear that's out there, by all of the chaos in our lives, but instead start looking forward and saying, what can I do? What can I control? And keep moving, because these challenges are not necessarily going to be with us forever, and you want to end up in a better place. So set yourself up to start moving along that way.
And I think another part of this that I've heard a lot about is this idea that it's also important to kind of figure out what matters to you, and that like finding some way to distill, those values or core principles, that can be like some kind of guiding light if one is kind of considering this kind of change. But I'm always, when I hear that, I think it sounds really great, but I'm sometimes wondering like, okay, but like, how do I do that? How do I go about figuring out, what really matters to me?
Yeah, well, I do think it's about, stepping back and looking at what your why is. Like, what is it that is motivating you to make some changes in your life? And part of that is just really coming from what's not working for you. And so the more you can focus on, like, what is it that you're really yearning for, that you're hoping for, and shut out all the noise that's around us, because, we can get so distracted by everything that's going on, and just prioritizing what's essential, tune out those distractions, the better you're going to be with regards to helping you make good decisions as you move along. And one of the courses that we offer, Cultivating Purpose, is really about that. It's about helping people figure out, what are your priorities? what is it that you're really seeking in this life stage? How do you prioritize those things that really matter to you and find your way even when the path is unclear? And some of it is also the courage to try things out, to stretch yourself, to move past perhaps some of the things that are creating fear and chaos in our lives, but just moving towards whatever goal that we're hoping to achieve.
And I think part of this is also, I'm thinking here of like the serenity prayer of accepting the things that I cannot change, and the courage to change the things I can. I think that's how it goes, and the wisdom to know the difference, right? And I think that could be a really a key here, particularly at this moment of disruption, uncertainty. A lot of folks are looking at their jobs and careers and wondering if they'll be replaced by AI, or all these kind of larger career questions I think a lot of us have. But to have this kind of wherewithal to kind of accept what we can control, and kind of tune out what we can't. And in that process, I think kind of looking for this kind of internal control, where we can be more proactive and resilient and motivated to achieve our goals. And I like how you kind of describe this as even maybe like a small step, rather than thinking like, oh my goodness, like I need to have this all figured out and I need to like be ready to like make that big move to the next thing, when that just kind of seems so daunting, that there are ways to take a little step to get a feel for whether this is, like a path that I want to continue to pursue.
Well, and doing things in small ways also helps you recalibrate. So, rather than taking a big leap, sometimes if you can start with small steps, you can also get feedback about, is this really moving me where I want to go? And even things that may feel like mistakes or things that didn't work out, you're still learning along the way. And so, not to discount the experiments that you do that maybe you didn't turn out the way you wanted them to be. So small steps can help you see if you're moving in the right direction and then recalibrate direction along the way. So it is really helpful to start small, especially if we're feeling a lot of fear and chaos in our lives, that, we don't need to upend everything. We can just start small and start where we're at. I also think, as you were talking about the serenity prayer, psychologists will often talk about locus of control and how that can shape our mindsets in the way that we look at what's going on in the world. And I think for a lot of us, we feel like there's so much that we can't control in the world around us. And according to psychologists, this would be considered an external locus of control. Those things that feel like they're out of our control, we can't do anything about it. Decisions are made by someone else. Luck may be determining things that, it's not due to our effort. And so, that those disruptions can really impact us if we're feeling like we're out of control. And one of the ways that we can shift that is really a mindset shift of thinking about what can we control, like the serenity prayer, but it's also this internal locus of control, that to shift more to how can I focus on what I can control, knowing that I can't control everything in the world, but there's still a lot that we do have control over. And so thinking about how do I move forward and where can I have control and impact, and focusing in those areas instead of just feeling overwhelmed by everything that's going on in the world.
Mhm. And it seems like this whole process, I don't know, requires a lot of kind of grace with yourself and a lot of patience, in that like I'm hearing you talk about, like you may take that first step and it's a total failure. And like having that kind of patience with yourself, and the kind of understanding of what you're up to, that allows you to kind of be flexible in the moment. I mean, I'm wondering if you could tell us, kind of talk more about that, because I'm imagining, many folks I know that might, encounter that first roadblock and throw their hands up, or, they kind of have this feeling of kind of the pressure of, like kids about to go off to college, or, these kind of pressures that may further kind of inhibit that ability to kind of keep throwing themselves out there and trying something new.
Absolutely. And I like how you framed it as grace with yourself, or it could also be kindness. But,
Mhm.
when we are in these times of change, of stretching ourselves, things aren't always going to go the way we hope. And, understanding that that's part of the learning process. And so if we are going to continue to learn and grow, we're stretching ourselves, right? And so, if we stay in a safe space and never really stretch ourselves, then we're never going to maybe move in directions that are so meaningful to us or get us what we want. So part of learning and growing is stretching, and stretching is can offer challenges for us, but it's also understanding that that's part of the process. And so, be offer yourself grace, be kind to yourself. You're not going to get it the first time around, and that's to be expected. And so, I think that idea that we're going to continue to grow and learn is so important. And focusing on that growth is also where we're heading, will help you move forward.
And here, I think like this speaks so much to the idea of the Midlife Academy and this idea of kind of organizing this space for folks who are kind of ready to start making that move to do so with like with some structure, with some, like smart people in the room that have done a lot of reading and thinking on this, as well as other people in the room who are like looking for that little push. But with the cultivating purpose class, like really kind of more focused on, like, okay, what is that thing that drives you and that thing that's going to bring, greater meaning to your life. But what I'm also hearing is the importance of networks and connections, that you're not doing this alone, and that you can, find folks in your network, create new networks that give you that sounding board for, where you think you might go, that give you maybe a reality check about, like what you're starting to imagine for yourself, but also just that kind of support that these kind of changes really can really flourish if you've got that kind of backbone.
Yeah, absolutely. So, a lot of us think about tapping our networks when we're looking for new jobs or new careers, right? So we know that, when we're in job transition, we need to be building that network. We need to connect with people. But I really think that we need to be thinking about that network as being the people that are surrounding us, that are helping us grow and stay connected across all of what we're doing. And so the time to develop your network is not when you're needing a network. It's
Mhm.
to have your network there for not only exploring new options, but also, to field test some things, um, or also just to provide you with some of that support and encouragement, and also to be able to take advantage of some of the serendipity that happens when we connect with other people. So, if our network is broad enough and deep enough, we have people that we can consult with about ideas we're exploring. We also can put ourselves in positions to find out about those opportunities. There's a psychologist, John Krumboltz, who has this theory. He calls it planned happenstance. And his idea behind this is that luck is no accident. So, but when we put ourselves out there, we have networks of people that we open up ideas. We never know where that's going to take us, or who in our network might have ideas for us to connect with others, or opportunities that we might be able to take advantage. So these chance encounters and these relationships can really influence the direction and the trajectory of our careers, and rekindle some of those interests that we may maybe have moved away from. So that network is important now, and it's going to be important moving forward.
I've got to speak out on behalf of my introvert friends here. So, like that putting yourself out there, I think like may cause one's like stomach to drop, and who are, less, extroverted or comfortable in these situations. I'm wondering if you can suggest other ways, one could, build a network when like, that putting yourself out there feels something like that feels so terrifying to some.
Well, I can say too, like an extrovert might love those like speed networking events where you get a whole group of people together, and it's kind of the what is it, the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, like someone in the room knows something, and these event kinds of things. But I think oftentimes it's the introverts who really excel at some of these relationships. And so don't like count yourself down if you're an introvert and you feel intimidated, because where you may start is with people that you already know that are safe people for you. So start with the people that care about you, that you know on some level, and look at deepening those relationships. And so, it doesn't have to be this big intimidating thing of, I need to network, but more, your neighbor might have a background that, you're curious about, and say, hey, I'd love to hear more about what you do in this field, and can we have coffee? Or come on over and let's barbecue. I'd love to learn more about what you do. And it's these kinds of interactions that can help you blossom your ideas, because again, you're putting out there some ideas that you have that they might be half baked, but it also provides you that information. So you don't have to like get out there and be a social person if you're more introverted, but focus on relationships and start where you feel safe and confident, and build from there.
Mhm.
And, I do think, you can also build relationships by trying on some side projects, like join some professional group or volunteer in your community. Again, you end up expanding not only who's in your network, but also maybe the diversity of backgrounds. So a lot of us are really comfortable with people who are like us. And that may be, just personality. It may be the kind of work we do. And really, what this process is developing broader networks help you envision and imagine yourself beyond what you're doing now. So, like expanding that and starting in places where, it may be easy for you to tap in.
Wonderful. Well, thanks, Kate. It has been a pleasure to chat with you today about the Midlife Pivot. We encourage you all to check out the Midlife Academy. We're at midlife.umn.edu, where you can learn more about our courses for helping, people navigate what's next. We also encourage you to get on our mailing list as we envision, coming out with a variety of courses, all kind of in this realm. And we look forward to having you back again soon.
Thanks so much, Bree. This was fun.